Today we're going to continue learning about Native Americans. We will look at tribes from 4 different regions of the United States and compare and contrast their lifestyles. Before we get started, let's look at our essential question and key vocabulary words for today. Since you already have your vocabulary words in your homework packet, you don't need to write them down, but you do need to copy down the essential question. What are the similarities and differences between the Eastern Indians, Plains Indians, Northwest Indians, and Arctic Indians? Native Americans had different cultures depending on where they lived. Some Native Americans lived in forest regions where they hunted forest animals and made homes out of wood. Other tribes lived in very cold places and built homes out of ice and snow. Where Native Americans lived and what natural resources they had determined their culture. Today we will learn about Eastern Native Americans, Great Plains Native Americans, Pacific Northwest Native Americans, and Arctic Native Americans. First, let's look at the Eastern Native Americans. They lived in the eastern woodlands, an area that stretched east from the Mississippi River to the Atlantic Ocean. It ran south from the Great Lakes to the Ohio Valley. American Indians settled among its hills and valleys and along seacoasts. The area had 4 seasons, including cold winters and hot summers. Many different trees grew in the forests, and several kinds of animals lived in the area. Most tribes spoke Iroquois or Algonquin. They used the region's forests to build their homes, which they called wigwams. Winter wigwams were larger than summer wigwams. To build them, men bent small trees into a dome-shaped frame and tied them together. Women covered this frame with birch bark or mats made from plants. The Eastern Indians also used trees to build canoes. The canoes they built were fast and lightweight. Tribes used animal skins such as deer hide to create clothing. They also wore capes made of wild turkey feathers to keep them warm and dry. Eastern Indians relied heavily on resources from the forest where they lived. Next, let's look at Great Plains Indians. They lived in the Great Plains region, which extended from the Rocky Mountains to the Mississippi River Valley. From north to south, it stretched from Canada to Texas and included Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, Nebraska, Colorado, Kansas, New Mexico, Oklahoma, and Texas. This region had cold winters and hot summers and mostly treeless grassland. There were many different animals who lived there, but the most important creature on the plains was the buffalo. The Great Plains Indians considered the buffalo sacred because it was so valuable to them. They used parts of the animal to make many things that they needed to survive. They used buffalo skins to cover their homes, which they called teepees. They also used buffalo hides to make warm blankets to wear in the winter. They would use buffalo skin to paint decorative portraits, which described important events from their history. Warriors even made shields from buffalo hides. Now let's look at the Pacific Northwest Indians. They lived on a narrow strip of land along the Pacific coast. It stretched from present-day Alaska to California. Many tribes settled on the ocean shore. This area received heavy rainfall most of the year and was home to many different kinds of fish and animals. Tribes used wood from the forest around them to build their homes. They built huge wooden structures that served as homes for several families. Outside each home, they placed totem poles. On these poles, tribes carved figures of animals, humans, and spirits. The carvings told about important events in the family's history and indicated the family's social position. Tribes also used wood to protect against the wet climate by weaving it into warm, waterproof coats and hats. Finally, let's look at the Arctic Indians. These were some of the earliest Native American tribes who settled along the coasts of Alaska and northern Canada. Their environment greatly affected the way they lived. The weather was too cold for farming, so they hunted and fished to survive. They hunted seals, caribou, and polar bear. They depended on these animals for clothing, food, and shelter. During the summer months, Arctic Native Americans lived in tents made out of animal skins. During the winter, they lived in houses made of snow and ice. Now it's time to practice. We're going to compare and contrast the different Native Americans we learned about today. Head back to the playlist and complete the practice assigned to your group.